For camera reviewers and the industry at large, street photographers are no longer the priority. We don't need 8K open-gate video or in-set detect autofocus. Instead, 5 features reviewers overlook that make a difference on the street. Today, let's go through 3 cameras at 3 different price points to see how much street photographers have to pay to get the features we want. Hello, I'm Jack. I'm a scientist for work and street photographer for fun, but it's enthusiasts like us who keep the industry afloat. Yet all the new releases target videos, sports, or wildlife shooters, and it's not the first and won't be the last time street photography is dismissed. The features we need are not talked about enough. So today, let's see what you can get for $2, $4 versus $10,000, and a mystery pick you can get for about $1,000 to figure out which segment of the market has the best value proposition for street photographers. A big thank you to Rubber Monkey for sending through the Ulanzi grip gear I needed for this video. Feature 1. The shutter. This is very subjective, but we all know photographers who sold cameras because they didn't like the shutter sound. It is the part of the camera we interact with most. And really, it's not that hard to record the sound, but almost no reviewers do this. It's simple enough to turn off all the other electronic sounds in the camera, hold the camera right next to the mic as close as possible, then move 1 meter away to see how audible the shutter is at different distances. Out of these cameras, the Nikon ZF is the loudest. But it is a low, full of bass, pleasurable shutter sound, which blends very easy into a crowd. It's not the loudest. I think my mystery camera pick is louder, but it's a nice sound as well. The Leica M11 is quieter. Some purists still prefer the Leica M10P shutter sound better, but look, it's so quiet it doesn't make a difference to me. But nobody beats the Nikon Z8 in this category. It has one of the fastest scanning stacked sensors on the market. There's no mechanical shutter, let alone mechanical shutter sound. For the sake of comparison, I set the shutter sound to Type B on the lowest volume setting, not quite silent, just because I like the audio feedback for myself. I can only hear this sound barely with my eye right up to the camera. No one else can possibly hear it. That's one of the main benefits when you move up to the $4,000, $5,000 price point. For $2,000, there's great value in full frame, the Nikon ZF, the new Z5 II, or the Panasonic S5, S5 II series. For $2,000, these sensors won't have the highest megapixels, won't be the fastest scanning sensors. If you want that for this price point, you'll need to go used or cropped, either APS-C or Micro Four Thirds. Why full frame sensors matter to me is for adapting vintage glass. More on this later. But first, feature 2. A quick startup time. As quick as possible is what we need out on the street, but very few reviewers measure camera startup time. Granted, it is tricky to measure accurately. You need the shutter to fire as soon as possible after the camera turns on. Autofocus might slow this down or mix the results up, so manual focus only. But switching the camera on, then pressing the shutter while stopping the timer is a multitasking challenge, and the best way I figured out how to do this is with 2 cameras filming. One to film the camera from the side, the other from the top. I can then count the video frames from the exact moment the camera turns on to when the shutter fires. And you need a studio to do all this testing, but long-time viewers know my studio was flooded, so I've taken over my wife's work from home desk for the time being. I clamped the Ulanzi photo video stand to my wife's desk. I did check it was okay with her first. The bar has tiny little ridges all over, creating more friction for the friction arms and the crab clamps to hold 2 cameras and a tube light stably, all without damaging the desk. Thanks to Rubber Monkey again for helping me with this temporary, very temporary, I promised, studio setup. Based on these tests, here's the Nikon ZF's startup speed for $2,000, and here's the Nikon Z8's startup time for double that price. Not bad. So what do you get for the $10,000 upgrade Leica? Quite a bit slower, maybe too slow to react to fast-moving scenes. My workaround is to never turn the camera off, half pressing the shutter to wake the camera up, but if you're trying to conserve battery life, this isn't ideal. There is a mystery camera pick whose startup time blitzed the competition. It's super competitive, but I don't actually need the startup time to be this fast. I'd just like to know how the spec on a new camera compares to the cameras I already own. So if you're a reviewer with a demo unit of an unreleased camera, please measure the startup time. instead of just resolution or speed. With stacked sensors, you can have both. Sony, Canon, and Nikon now all offer a full-frame, high-resolution stacked sensor camera, but this doubles the price from our entry-level options. Are stacked sensors worth it for street photography? Not for the burst shooting modes. No street photographer I know wants to process 30, 50, 60 frames per second for stills, but most stacked sensor models are paired with the brand's fastest processors, which means those cameras are super quick to start up, focus, playback, and change settings. That speed of operation does matter for street, but is that worth the hit to dynamic range? I share these test results and talk about these decisions on my weekly blog and newsletter, but for landscape and fine art, I don't think that trade-off is worth it. When I'm freezing the action or stop down in zone focusing for street, we all shoot at higher than base ISO. At that point, the dynamic range is about the same, and I think stacked sensors are great for street shooters because of the speed, but double the price is a lot to pay. The mystery camera with the very competitive startup speed doesn't have a stacked sensor actually, and it costs less than $1,000. But stacked sensors have another advantage for street, and that's feature 3, the viewfinder, not its resolution. I think that only matters if it's less than 3.69 million dots and smaller than 0.5 times magnification. Anything larger than that is nice to have, but street photographers spend half our time shooting via the screen. What's more important, I think, is how quickly the camera switches from screen to viewfinder and vice versa, and how long it takes the EVF to toggle on once the eye sensor is triggered. It isn't a given that stacked sensors will be faster in this realm. My old Sony A1 had an older processor. It was actually quite a bit slower. But when we compare the Z8 to the ZF, both pick up my eyes from about 2 inches away, but the Z8's EVF is quicker to turn on. The biggest benefit for stacked sensors is actually blackout-free shooting. Your live feed of the scene is never interrupted, even as the shutter goes up and down. This is a real advantage over non-stacked sensors, akin to an optical viewfinder, but with extra exposure preview benefits. The Nikon ZF doesn't have this, the $1,000 mystery camera pick doesn't have this, but the $10,000 Leica does, sort of. Leica went for a non-stacked backside illuminated 61 megapixel chip, but it comes with an optical rangefinder viewfinder offset to the side of the camera. Like the Z8, there's never any viewfinder blackout on a Leica, but you do lose the exposure preview perks of that EVF. Feature 4 is ergonomics, which granted is hard to review objectively. All everyone talks about is weight. For street photography, I care more about how balanced the camera is when paired with a fast prime. On a neck strap or a shoulder strap, does it tilt forward or back? How symmetrical is the camera body? Does the EVF hump or buttons get caught on your clothes or bags? The grip is the most confusing part of ergonomics because a heavy camera can feel fine if its grip fits your hand perfectly. But everyone's hands are different. And for this, I defer to the gold standard. Every watch YouTuber obsessively reports their wrist size, the case and height size of the watch lug to lug width, then film that watch being worn from every conceivable angle. So why can't we do something similar for cameras? Let's start with standardized measurements for hand size. Here's mine. And footage of me holding the camera from as many angles as possible to check how my fingers wrap around the grip and or dangle. Better yet, film someone else, your partner, let's say, holding the camera, so there's more than one subjective hand size experience on screen. I think you should also have to declare if you're a back button focuser, because this changes the position of your thumb on the camera over long shooting sessions. For the record, I'm not a back button focuser, I just use the shutter. The ZF comes in at 812 grams with the small rig grip attached, and for me, this grip gives enough purchase for none of my fingers to cramp or dangle. But if your hands are bigger than mine, here's my measurements again, your fingers might not have enough space. If your hands are smaller, like my wife's hands, here are her hand measurements, her shorter fingers don't cover the grip enough to offset the weight of the camera with one hand shooting. On the ZF and the smaller grip, there's no back grip as an extra point of support, so that weight is even worse. The Z8 is heavier than a ZF at 910 grams, but the front grip is rounded, substantial, and there's a ridge on the back to give extra support. For me, the weight's not a major issue because of the grip, but with my wife's smaller hands, the Z8's weight is a little too much. She does find it more comfortable than the ZF. What about the Leica? No grip at all whatsoever to speak of, but strangely, it doesn't need one. It's only 540 grams, or the M-mount lenses are smaller and manual focus only. So you're supporting the camera with two hands, and the smaller rangefinder form factor fits me and my wife's hands equally well. Let's hope she doesn't want a matching Leica in exchange for borrowing her desk. But does that ergonomic perk make it worth $10,000? Well, no, there's no autofocus, there's no exposure preview, there's only one SD card slot, a total ripoff, right? All the M lenses are tiny, just like the camera. And the slower manual focus shooting experience means in theory you'll have more keepers, but there's no video, no IBIS. The sensor, processor, startup speed, and focusing method are all much slower. But the one thing you get from this 10 grand setup that is still hard to replicate is feature 5 for street photography, the manual focus experience. I love vintage glass. I think a lot of us do. The majority of them were made for 35mm film, so full frame sensors don't change the field of view when adapting manual lenses. I want my street photography camera to have great manual focus assist tools. I want to know if you can program and name manual lenses in the menu, how easy it is to zone focus, but very few reviewers talk about manual focus features on camera launch day. Did any video talk about this in the S1 II's launch this week? It's simply not a priority. Credit to Nikon, they marketed manual focus as a big ZF feature, which has manual focus subject detection, zoom magnify up to 400%, and electronic rangefinder confirmation. These are still viewed as niche features though, and they haven't made it available on the flagship Z8 or Z9. Although I think some of these features come standard on Canon cameras. Fujifilm also has a nice manual focus implementation, but it's like pulling teeth trying to track this information down. More companies and reviewers should talk about manual focus. Voigtlander lenses are selling like hotcakes for a reason, and the latest EVFs make it easier to nail focus shooting wide open. But the whole manual focus process is still quicker on a Leica. Rangefinder coupling doesn't rely on electronics. I can start focusing with a Leica through its optical viewfinder before the camera even turns on. If you're shooting on 35mm or tighter, you can see outside the frame lines of your composition, and coupled with no optical viewfinder blackout, you can recompose straight away after every single shot. The cherry on top is zone focusing, and mount lenses are perfectly calibrated for f8, f11 zone focusing from the hip, and compared to mirrorless cameras which need an adapter, it can throw that zone focus alignment off very easily. But of course, that doesn't mean a street photography kit should be expensive. We can all benefit from the speed of a stacked sensor and luxuriate in the old school feel of a Leica rangefinder. But most of the essential features I talked about today are more about thoughtful user design than technological leaps. A budget of $2,000 should be enough. From Nikon, the new Z5 II is a killer deal that should meet all of our street photography needs. But again, very few reviewers with hands-on access have talked about the features that matter the most on the street. What matters the most to me is a quick startup time, decent ergonomics, and a nice sounding shutter, which actually can all be found for less than $1,000 in my mystery camera pick. A used Nikon DSLR. Any DSLR. My DF is the one I went for, but DSLRs in general are my go-to recommendation for beginners starting out. You'll find that video here if you're interested. I'm Jack. This is Bokeh Therapy.